Here we go. Yeah, so basically, as I was saying, I've been preparing for my Wake Festival. And one of the things that I'm doing at that festival in Ireland is a day at the Crawfordsburn Inn, which is this beautiful hotel that melts into this forest park. And it's somewhere where C.S. Lewis often would hang out, and he'd meet friends there. He had a belated honeymoon with Joy there. And the forest itself is reputed to kind of, be one of the influences in the landscape of Narnia itself. So we're going to be going there for a day, hanging out, going for walks. And I wanted to do a talk on C.S. Lewis because he is an interesting figure. He's someone who grew up in Belfast, just around the corner from where I lived. In fact, one of my friends lived right next door to Little Lee, which is his childhood home. And I've always kind of admired his intellect, his ability to write in various genres, his enjoyment of debate. He was actually the president of the Socratic Society in Oxford for many years. I think he might have actually founded the society. He loved nothing more than debating with the intellectuals of the day about all manner of things. But obviously one of his main interests was religion. Philosophy for him was never a subject. He once actually talked about philosophy as a subject, and one of his friends said, for the original philosophers, it wasn't a subject; it was a matter of life and death. And C.S. Lewis was like, "Yeah, it is. This is not some sort of academic thing. Issues of life and meaning and philosophy and theology are issues about what it means to be human." So he's an interesting character. However, of course, I'm kind of critical of some of his work. His apologetics, are sometimes, I find kind of problematic in various ways. So some people have said to me, why is this, why have you become interested in Lewis again recently? But it's partly because I think there is a way to radicalize him, that actually he has some incredible insights that he puts incredibly beautifully. And I was thinking about what to say on this video, and I was reminded of this little story about this Irish guy, Seamus, who is in Belfast, and he's on this bus, and this tourist gets on the bus and says to Seamus, "Listen, I'm looking for Shaftesbury Square. Could you tell me, when to get off the bus?" And Seamus says, "Oh yeah," he says, "no problems, no problems." He says, "Just keep an eye on me and see whenever I get off." The tourist says yes. He says, "Okay, yeah, all you have to do is get off the stop before me." Right? And that's how I feel about C.S. Lewis, is I follow his work in various ways. And then once I get to the end of it, I'm like, crap, I should have just got off the stop before he did. And one of the examples of this is in his book, Surprised by Joy, which I actually have to confess I just read yesterday. I'm not one for autobiographies, and this is kind of his most autobiographical work. But I read it. It's very beautifully written, and it has some beautiful insights into the area of joy. And I just want to kind of chat about those. So basically, C.S. Lewis differentiates joy from happiness and pleasure. Right? So he uses joy in a technical sense. And basically, pleasure is something you, I guess, receive if you go for a nice walk, you have a drink with friends. Pleasure is something that you get from some concrete activity. Happiness, I don't know exactly how Lewis would define it, but I'm guessing he would be kind of Aristotelian, or he would be the idea that happiness is a life well lived. Living the good life. But for him, joy is more like longing than pleasure or happiness. It is a orientation towards something that you don't have, because longing, of course, is what you feel for something that you don't have. You long, you yearn for home. It means you're not at home. But it's different from our usual sense and understanding of longing, in the sense that longing is often a painful thing. We yearn for that which we feel would give us pleasure, that we feel would make us happy. And so yearning and longing can actually be deeply painful experiences for us. For Lewis, joy is a type of longing that is pleasurable. It's a type of longing for another world, another place, another thing that doesn't bring us suffering, but actually enlivens us, makes us feel lighter, makes us experience the world with more depth and density, with more intensity than ever. So joy is distinguished from happiness and from pleasure and even from longing. So it's happiness and pleasure in the sense of it's something that you don't have, but it's similar to longing in that sense, but it's different from longing because it's a pleasurable yearning, a pleasurable longing. Like maybe, I don't know, wanting to go on a holiday and you're thinking about the holiday, and just thinking about the holiday is actually making the rest of your life better. Now, of course, you can think about a holiday and just be really depressed and kind of go, I really want it to arrive. I really want it to arrive. But joy would, I suppose, in this analogy be, that experience of booking something and it just like lightens up everything else. It makes work easier. It makes your relationships easier because you're not so stressed. And you're thinking about it. In fact, the holiday rarely lives up to the excitement of the waiting for it, Now, C.S. Lewis says in Surprised by Joy that one of the things he learned from the idealists, because Lewis was an idealist for a time, for a long time actually. He even said he followed Berkeley and Berkeley's philosophy. He said he learned that it is better that heaven should exist than that we should ever get there. Right? So he said this is something that he learned from idealism and that he believes strongly to this day. It is better that heaven exists than that any of us should ever get there. And this is a typical beautiful phrase by Lewis. And in one way to unpack it is to say that, for Lewis, heaven is something that defies the imagination and the intellect, right? In the Bible, there's this verse that says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived the glory to come, heaven. Heaven is beyond the ability to conceptualize and the mind to see or to hear. It defies the imagination. Our reason comes to a stuttering halt before it. Right? And so for Lewis, all the imaginary images of heaven that he would conjure up were nothing but aromas of something that is beyond the imagination. So heaven is the name for a place that defies all understanding. So even the word place is problematic because place defines somewhere in space and in time. But for Lewis, spatial and temporal categories wouldn't be appropriate to heaven either. So it's not like you go up to, you travel far enough into space and you'll find heaven. So heaven defies all of our ability to grasp. But the idea that it exists for Lewis is what's most important. That what we see and feel and touch is not all there is. That the universe contains something uncontainable. That our world is broken apart by some unimaginable vision, a vision that without vision of another world, right? And that for Lewis is incredibly important. And joy then is, in a sense, the moments in which we dimly perceive that this is not all there is, that other worlds are possible, that these are the shadowlands. Now, for Lewis, in the last chapter of Surprised by Joy, he defines Christianity as the path. He says, joy are like signposts. Our experiences of joy are these moments that point us beyond ourselves, beyond this world of materiality. And we can never grasp those moments. You might get it when you're having a fireside conversation. You might get it when you have a conversation with someone on a plane, or you read some piece of poetry, or you look at a sunset. And there's just this moment of transcendence. But as soon as you try to reflect on that, you lose it. C.S. Lewis says what you end up with is the sediment of the joy, but not the joy itself. So you can do that, you can reflect on it, but you can't bring it back necessarily by reflecting on what happened. In fact, the very act of reflection on what happened often makes it dissipate all the more. Actually, that's the difference between psychoanalysis and psychology. Psychology is a process of reflecting on human subjectivity, where psychoanalysis and phenomenology is an attempt to kind of observe what's actually going on subjectively from the inside, from within. But anyway, so for C.S. Lewis, joy happens in the strangest of moments, in the most inane moments. The first time he experienced joy was here in Belfast, when I think it was his brother brought in and created a little miniature garden and was playing with that. And if I can remember this correctly, just weirdly, that moment of looking at that little garden opened up this little moment, this little surprise by joy, there is something other than this. And then for him, say his conversion, he says that Christianity is then getting on the path. Now, I like this analogy because Christianity for him then isn't the destination. It's not getting to the place that joy is pointing. It's kind of like, in this analogy, more consistently walking it, living your life oriented towards something that is other than this world. But not in a painful way, like, oh, this is rubbish, I hate the walk, I can't wait to get to the destination. It's actually enjoying the not being there, enjoying the waiting for the holiday rather than the holiday itself. Now, this is where I want to get off the bus. Right. This is the very point where I'm like right with Lewis. I think he beautifully articulates what joy is. This fits very neatly to what I talked about in other Facebook Lives. What I love about these, by the way, is that they're all beginning to interconnect. So if you're listening to this and you like it, go back and listen to my video on want and need, or my video on the three different types of spirituality. And, you'll see these themes are things that I've explored before. This longing for something which we don't have, this openness to unknowing, doubt, complexity, the enjoyment of not having certainty and satisfaction. So Lewis has all of that. But then what he has at the last stop is this idea that, yes, but there is this ultimate utopia, this ultimate stopping point. Now, he calls it a beginning, not an end. So heaven for him is the beginning of something else that lasts for all eternity. But it is still the idea that the path ultimately, not in this life, but in the next, we get to this end location. And that's just where I want to cut the head off this and keep everything else and say, well, yes, if idealism taught C.S. Lewis that it is better for heaven to exist than for any of us to ever get there, then the lesson of deconstruction, and the lesson of a philosopher like John Caputo would be, it's better that heaven insists than that any of us should ever get there. John Caputo has a beautiful book called The Insistence of God. So instead of talking about the existence of God, he talks about the insistence of God. Because even the word exist has a spatial and temporal dimension. When you say that something exists, you're saying that it exists in space and time, in some location, in some sort of way. And C.S. Lewis would be the first to admit that. He's talked about that elsewhere, where even in science, the most precise type of language, we fall into metaphor, when we're talking about quantum particles, et cetera, et cetera. So even the word existence can be problematic. But for someone like Caputo, we can talk about heaven as an insistent force, which means there are moments of joy in our lives, which are moments in which the material world seems to have cracks within it. Those cracks are type of transcendence, that other worlds are possible, that other dimensions are possible, that there is something beyond anything we can imagine or reason that calls us. And in these little moments where we're surprised by joy, because they just come along at the weirdest of times, we get a sense of the type of life we should be leading, a type of life that is meaningful and humanizing and beautiful, a type of life in which we walk the path towards a world that we may never reach. And then for him, when he defines Christianity as actually walking the path, that's very close to me, to what like someone like Camus is saying, where you orient your life towards walking within the unknowing and walking within basically what Camus calls the absurd, which is a world in which we feel like there is something more wondrous and more beautiful that seems to always resist being captured, that doesn't seem quite here. And what we in a sense do is embrace that absurdity of living in a world where we want something. We can't quite put our finger on what it is, but we experience it in our lives and it never quite arrives. But we somehow, the rebel for Camus is the one who embraces that absurdity and finds life within it and moves always towards this heavenly utopia, but always saying it's out of reach. It is still to come. Okay, so that's in a nutshell my reading of C.S. Lewis and joy. And of course, he was surprised by joy in a very literal sense. He doesn't talk about this in the book at all, so I'm not sure if it happened after the book was written. I need to look at the dates. But, he fell in love with Joy Grisham, and they got married, and she died. And, this was one of the defining parts of C.S. Lewis's life. And what's interesting is what Lewis is describing is very similar to falling in love. When you fall in love with someone who is there, who is in front of you. But you also fall in love with their potentiality, with their hidden recesses, with their unconscious, with their openness to the future. So when you love someone, the love is also for the hidden city that person is, for the hidden depths that person is. So there's a longing to get to know them better. Like a person is a universe to explore. And the more you get to know them, the more you realize that universe keeps going and going. And so the longing of love is a pleasurable longing. It's a longing for the person that you're with, who is still to arrive, who is still to explore and to get to know better. And so I think that's a nice metaphor for Lewis's surprised by joy. So in conclusion then, for Lewis, joy is a pleasurable longing. And joy are those moments that we experience in life when our world is opened up to new possibilities and new worlds that we can't quite imagine, but that seem to call us beyond what we presently have. And there is a way of actually living into that and walking that path, which he calls Christianity, which he feels happened in his conversion. And in walking along that path, he found a genuine way to affirm existence. But where I want to radicalize Lewis is just get off the bus, the stop before he does, and say that actually joy and the cultivating of joy, I think, is the essence of the good life. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope you got something. I should actually, just 1 second, I'll look, see if there's any questions. So Simon says, one thing about the spatial and temporal sense of heaven as place is that it has clear political implications. Yes, Simon, absolutely. And I don't know whether you mean that positively or negatively, because you could look at it either way. I want to look at it, first of all, negatively and go that often when we have a sense of a utopia that we can clearly imagine in spatial and temporal ways, that can often lead to us thinking that we can nail down what liberation, democracy, justice, and freedom really is and really looks like. But the idea that those concepts, the Derridean idea that those concepts are always, in a sense, unimaginable, or there's always an unimaginable dimension to those things, means that any political systems we create are always open to new interpretations and new possibilities. So yeah, but definitely there's a political dimension to how we conceptualize utopia and heaven. Let's see. Is it Jan De Beer says, I think Jürgen Moltmann articulates this beautifully when he calls hope anticipated joy. I think this shares C.S. Lewis's ideas about joy. That's interesting. Actually, I haven't read much Moltmann, but I've read a lot of Ernst Bloch, who Moltmann was very influenced by. My PhD supervisor was a Bloch expert. So I sometimes think I might sound a bit like Moltmann, occasionally, not knowing that I do. But yeah. Let's see. Oh yes, Tim's quoting C.S. Lewis. He says, shoot for heaven and you get this world, but shoot for this world and you get nothing. That kind of runs amok of your material. What do you think? Tim, no, I love that quote, but I'll be honest with you. Yes, Tim, you're right. I am not agreeing with Lewis in the sense of I'm getting off the stop before him. What I love about the quote that you just gave is that's exactly what I want to say. Is deconstruction and pyrotheology, what I do is about aiming for the impossible. It aims towards the unimaginable, unforeseeable future, which means you orient yourself to worlds that don't yet exist. You orient yourself towards something, and in doing that, you transform the world. In doing that, you're able to enjoy and embrace the world. So that's why I like that quote of C.S. Lewis, one of my favorites. The difference is, well, I want to be more true to Lewis than Lewis. I want to be a literalist. He says, aim for heaven. He doesn't say, get heaven and you will get the world. Isn't that right? Let's see. Let me look. Yes, shoot for heaven. So that's my point. My point is, like, the problem is if he said, get heaven and you get the world. Keep with the world and you end up with nothing. It's the aiming, and that's what Derrida is about. Derrida is saying that you constantly orient yourself to the potentiality of the future, to the novelty of the future, and in doing that, you find a richness of life. And that's why I am. And here's the thing: you'll probably know this. Like with Lewis, you either get people who love him, who basically what he says is it's Jesus and Lewis, and then everybody else, right? Or you get people who hate him. In terms of his apologetics and can't stand it. I kind of want to say that actually I enjoy him a lot, but I do want to radicalize him, and I do want to say that my reading of Lewis is one that he would agree with. What I want to say is that my reading of Lewis is attempting to find the radical potential of Lewis that was lost in his conservatism and his kind of more crude apologetics. So I want to say I always want to say in the same way that Zizek reinterprets G.K. Chesterton. I want to kind of do the same thing with Lewis. Let's see. Oh yes, Tim's saying again. Oh yeah, sorry. You said C.S. Lewis is conservative compared to your material, absolutely. But as you said in the previous vid, he's an excellent writer. Yeah, that's it. I mean, Tim, honestly, people are saying to me, "Why are you kind of like taking this interest in Lewis?" But One of the main reasons is I actually find it incredible that this guy captured so many of his generation, the imagination and intellect of so much of his generation, and then millions of people subsequent to that. There's something of his spirit that I really admire and I think we can really learn from. And in the retreat, I want to kind of draw that out. How do we become more like Lewis, especially if you're a writer or if you're a speaker? How can you become more like Lewis in his spirit, while of course critically disagreeing with a lot of him, which by the way Lewis would love. I mean, that's, as I say, with both with the Inklings and the Socratic Society, he loved a good debate. He was an Ulsterman, just like me, and we love a good fight. Nothing the Northern Irish like more than a good fight over a beer in the pub, right? So that's what I'm really, really interested in. There was something else I was going to say about that. What was it? Yeah, oh yeah, he was also so well read. I mean, when I read Surprised by Joy, I was like, okay, the one thing I can't do, which I probably been guilty of in the past, is thinking that Lewis's work is shallow or something. Not all of it, but some of his theological work is shallow. But also realizing that actually, he read so deeply that I think that's something that is a bit more difficult for me to say. Even when I read some of his essays and think, oh my goodness, I really realize, oh no, he's read everything, And he even lectured in philosophy briefly in Oxford. He said not very well, but he did do that. All right, guys, listen, thank you so much for tuning in again. I really appreciate it. I'll probably won't do one of these until I finish Wake next week, but maybe before I go back to LA, I'll get another one in. If any of you are coming to the festival, I'll be seeing you in a few days. Thanks and take care. Goodbye.